So, to our audience, welcome to today's discussion concerning health and wellness. The pandemic continues making health and wellness a hot topic, not only at the dinner table, but for government as well. So please remember that if you have any questions, to add them to the chat feature, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will address them as soon as we have this panel type discussion. So thank you again for being here with us, everyone. So Senator Jackson, so the first question that I have is, what is your stance on helping to implement laws and programs that will prevent employees from overworking themselves and neglecting their health in order to maintain their jobs?
Yeah.
Yes.
So first and foremost, I'm very clear that we have to make some changes. Is my audio okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So I very much strongly believe in unions. I think that we are better. We are better when we represent one another as a democracy, right? And that's essentially what unions do. They allow people to use the power of collective bargaining in order to promote a democracy in which they can be paid fair wages and have fair working conditions. And so I think that's one of the places where we need to start, is to encourage and to make a pathway for people to be able to unionize. And some of that will mean repealing our right to fire. That's actually what it is. We're a right to fire state. It's called right to work, but
Right.
really it's a right to fire. And so it really does require us to make some changes there. And I also think, we've made a number of regressive laws in Georgia that have prohibited even cities from being able to make labor issues easier for their cities. So technically, you can't, as a city, increase the minimum wage for your city, broadly speaking, right? So the city of Decatur can't say everybody who works in Decatur, their minimum wage is going to be $15 an hour. You can't do that. Georgia has prohibited that, right? So even the places that want to do well and want to do better have been prohibited by some of these laws that I think it's very important that we try to address and to change. And then I think the other piece of it is we need to have paid family leave and paid parental leave, right? People get overworked because they have a choice. They can either go to work and make their low wages and pay their bills, or they could stay home and take care of their brand new baby and not be able to pay their bills, right? And that's just not a fair choice. That's not a choice that any new parent should have to make. It's not a choice that anyone who has a child who is at home sick with COVID or they themselves should have to make, right? If you go to work because you're afraid that if you miss work, you're going to either lose your job or not make enough money to pay for the hospital bill that you get because you got COVID, it ultimately makes us all unsafe, right? I mean, think about the ways that COVID could have been minimized. Like the spread of COVID could have been changed if we had simply said, you know what, if you get exposed, if you have symptoms, you get 2 weeks. And you'll be paid your hourly wage no matter what, and you stay home and isolate so that we do not spread this. But instead, people had to keep driving buses and they had those symptoms and they were sick. And so every person that got on that bus got exposed, right?
Yes.
Instead, people had to keep on working in all these different places. We look at factories, especially. There were not labor practices put in place to protect those workers. And so workers showed up because they had to show up because they had no paid leave. And then we saw massive outbreaks in our plants. So I think there's just a significant amount of things that we need to do in order to make space so that people can have more healthy and well-balanced lives.
Oh, that was great. Yes. Good information and good information that I'd not heard. I don't know about the audience, and we absolutely all agree that, yes, we need definitely things in place so that we can prevent the spread of COVID, especially right now, right?
That's right.
Oh, thank you for that. So another question we have, and again, please, audience, please remember to drop your questions into the Q&A function and we will ask them as we go. So I think you did more or less really address, should we consider revising the Georgia right to work state laws to help mitigate the slave mentality of employers? So yes,
Well,
Yes.
and I can say just a little bit more about that. So we are in those of us who live near around Atlanta. We are in the home of Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke very clearly and said that, let us not be confused about the language that's being used here. When we say it's a right to work, that it's actually it is a right to essentially provide low wages. It's a right to fire, and let us not get confused by that. Dr. Martin Luther King was just very clear that on our work towards civil rights, that needed to include the right to unionize, right? The right to participate in a form of democracy in your workplace that allows you to have access to fair wages. And so this isn't something that I made up and that I just imagined of like, oh, we need to be able to unionize and we need to get rid of the right to work. But since it's since the beginning of its implementations, the right to work laws were established here in Georgia in the 1940s with very specific and clear racialized reasoning. Um, basically, basically the way that it was introduced was to scare white working class people and say, look, we're going to protect you because if we don't protect you from unions, you will have to work alongside Black people and call them brother. And God forbid you have to do that. So we're going to make us a right to work state so you don't have to worry about those unions that are going to force you to have to be on a team with Black people. So that's the origins of that. It's deeply racialized and deeply racist. And so, that's another reason why we really need to push against that right to work law.
Yeah, that makes definite sense. So I didn't know all of that. It's so sad, but that's why it's important. I'll just say this, that it's important for us all to vote, especially at the local level, because these are things that we need to know. These are things that we need to fight for to make sure that we're represented well wherever it is we are, right? And
That's
especially
right.
at work, because this is how you earn a living in order to feed your families.
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And as someone said in our chat, it says this would definitely be helpful to reduce the overall stress for our well-being. Exactly, because we're seeing a lot of people suffering from mental health crisis as well, right about
That's
now.
right.
Yeah, I
That's
think COVID
right.
has just put a lot of stress on all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next question would be, so definitely this all seems to be driving an unhealthy culture across the board where there is nothing to protect individuals who would like more or less to prioritize their health and well-being. Could we do more to deploy the well-being practices in the workplace so working moms do not feel ostracized in the workplace?
Yeah, so I love talking about working moms. Part of the reason why I ran for office was because of my deep commitment to fighting and advocating on behalf of women and children and working moms. And so there are a couple of things that come to mind when I'm thinking about working moms and parents in general. We talked about paid parental leave and it being essential. And I think that's a part of how we help to not ostracize new parents, and as that we recognize that you're doing a really important task, and it's not just for your own well-being, right? When people have children, they are contributing to society, right? Like they are producing our future, our future amazing people, right? Like that's what they're doing. And so part of not ostracizing people means giving them time off to take care of those new people, so that they can have the fair start that they need to have because they have parents who are available to them. And another place of that, even before people give birth, though, and this I'm happy to say, Representative Park Cannon, who's also a DeKalb representative, introduced along with a number of members of the House, which is a Working for Two Act. She
Oh,
introduced this legislation just this last session, and so it's still alive. But basically, it says that employers who are employing someone who is pregnant need to provide reasonable accommodations for a person who is pregnant. And those reasonable accommodations can be as simple as, if you're working on a factory line, providing a stool for the person to sit, to sit on. Reasonable accommodations like providing a place after birth for a person to be able to pump or to breastfeed, right? Providing reasonable accommodations like maybe having an additional 15-minute break, because I've never been pregnant, but I've seen a lot of pregnant people in the world, and it looks like it's real tiring. So maybe, another 15-minute break. So just acknowledging that a person who is pregnant is working for two and needs to have some reasonable accommodations. I think that's, one of the steps that we can take. And then I want to also circle around to making sure. So some of the issues around being able to be, I think, a good mom and a good parent in general is being able to have access to healthcare. So here in Georgia, if you're a low wage worker, if you don't make very much money, then your child will be covered, most likely by Peach Care, right? We have access to health insurance for children. But if the parent isn't healthy, uh, does it really? I mean, it's great that your kid gets to go and get their wellness checkups and that they can get their immunizations and stuff, but if your mom is walking around and she's got a constant headache because she's got high blood pressure, how good of a mom can you be, right? And
Right.
so we have to expand access to healthcare in
Yes.
order to help parents be better parents, right? Like that's some of this work that absolutely needs to happen.
Yes, these are really great points, and you are giving us some very insightful information. Did not know about the um, Working for Two Act.
Yeah. So it's I think I have it here. Yeah, working for two. It was introduced just this year, so it's still alive and it's sponsored by Park Cannon. I don't even know if they've gotten a hearing yet, but it is something just to be aware of and to advocate for.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other advice you have for our employers to improve the overall health and well-being of their employees? You've given us some really great information so far. So just wondering if there's anything else that you can think of.
Yeah, I mean, so let's pay fair wages. Let's start there. I think that also, so I am a woman who works in a predominantly male environment. I'm a clergy person, and so one of the great stressors that I have in my own vocation, in my own work, is the constant stress of dealing with discrimination and of pay inequity. And so I think that's something that employers can be attentive to is making sure that there's fairness and equity in their pay. So not just good wages, but it's hard. If you were a Black woman working alongside a white man and he's making more money than you are, but he's only like half or mediocre, that does not make you healthy. Or it does. Let me speak for
It's
myself.
stressful.
It is stressful. It did not make me healthy, to be in that kind of environment. And so I think looking at those types of disparities, right, and making sure that there's equity in your workplace is one of the ways that we promote wellness. And another place that I want to lift up is also around. So this is about financial wellness too. But so many people I meet and encounter are in their late 60s, approaching their 70s, and they're still having to work. And the idea of retirement sounds great to them, but there is no pathway for them to access retirement because they've been working in places that haven't offered them access to a 401k. And so one of the things that I want to encourage people is to make sure that your employees have access to a 401k and that you give education
Mhm.
around why it's important for them to contribute. Now, I recognize all employers cannot afford to contribute to someone's retirement account. Like I'm not under any illusion that everybody can do 3.5%. But your employees, if they're educated around it, they can contribute themselves, but they need that education and they also need that access. Another piece of legislation that I want to lift up that Senator Nan Orrock has been working on is to create legislation that would allow people who have smaller businesses, so less than 100 folks, you'd be able to participate in the state 401k plan because we recognize, if you're a small business, making that available to your employee can be a real challenge. And so we're hoping to be able to bring some legislation that would say, look, if you work for a small business under 100 people and you can't provide that access to a 401k, come on into the state 401k plan. Again, the employer is not going to be required to pay in, but the employee will have a chance to establish a nest egg to begin to do that work towards building towards retirement. Because I know that every 65-year-old that I've met who has said, like, I don't know if retirement's ever gonna come, they're not healthy. And they're gonna just continue to work themselves into less well-being, because they don't have that access. So, I wanna commend that to folks, so to look into that. Nan Orrock is sponsoring that bill. I don't know the number, but I think that that could be really, really helpful to people's financial well-being and ultimately their full well-being.
Definitely. That's great information. Again, thank you for all of this wonderful information that you're sharing with us. And that is important so that people don't have to necessarily work themselves to death, right?
Right.
So thank you. um, Next question I have, to help people become better consumers of healthcare, and you probably, or well, let's say, what legislation provides more clear pricing and success ratio transparency from hospitals, doctors, and physicians?
Right. So in 2020, we passed legislation. It was SB 303, which is called the Georgia Right to Shop Act.
Mm.
What we actually talk about it though is the Transparency and Pricing Act. And so, there's been a lot of surprise billing. Like you show up and this has happened to my family. You go to the doctor for something that's a routine appointment, and you think that it's going to be your normal copay of 25 or $35 or whatever. And then you get home a couple weeks later and you get a bill for $1,000, and you're like, what? I didn't like, oh, that piece of blood that they pulled, they had to send to a special lab and charge me all this money, and you had no idea, right? And so that we have passed legislation, SB 303 in 2020, that calls for more fairness, more transparency. And also now, if you let's say you need to have, say, a hip replacement surgery, there is now a way that you can go and literally shop for the best price, right? You can kind of comparison price and see your insurance companies should be able, or supposed to, because of this law, help you navigate this. But say, like, okay, if I go to Piedmont Hospital, it's going to cost me X amount to have my hip replaced, using this surgeon and this care. If I go to DeKalb Medical, well, that doesn't exist anymore. If I go to Emory at Decatur,
Yes.
yeah, sorry, Kendra. If you go to Emory at Decatur, hey, I'm a proud Emory alum. I'm sorry I missed that.
No, you're
Um, if you go to Emory at Decatur, then it'll cost X, right? If you go to Hillendale, it'll be this. And so there has been some work towards that. I think there's much more that needs to happen around making sure that people know how much this is going to cost, and where can I get a better deal, or can I get a better deal. But there's been a start in that. The other piece of this is around emergency care. So anytime you have a emergency, the last thing you should be thinking about is how much is it going to cost, right? That really, when it's a true health crisis, we want people to be focused on getting better and not being worried that it's going to put them into some massive amount of debt. What we've seen in the past, though, is that insurance agency. So you go because you're like, I've got health insurance, I'm going to go to the emergency room, I'm going to get taken care of. Well, health insurances have started this practice of saying, oh, well, that wasn't actually a true emergency, so you have to pay for it. And so Senator Dr. Al introduced legislation this year that it's called the Prudent Citizens Act. So basically it says any average everyday person, like just nobody with medical knowledge, if they have reason to believe that it is emergency, then you cannot charge them for basically abusing the 911 or the emergency room system. Because what's happened is people have gone to the hospital and they've had like heart palpitations, right? They're experiencing chest pain, which any prudent person would say that's an emergency. But after the tests are run and all those things, the doctor says, well, actually, you were having a panic attack. And so the insurance companies are saying, you shouldn't have gone to the emergency room. So here, you're going to pay this whole bill. And so we really are working to try to change that, to say, like, hey, this person came with a reasonable amount of concern,
right.
and therefore you have to pay for it. You can't reject them in this.
Wow, that's important.
It's very important.
Wow, you're right. And I do feel, and I know from working at Emory, that they do try and deter people from using the emergency rooms as for doctor's office visits. Just starting to use places like Medcura places like urgent care instead of the emergency room so that people that do have true emergencies can be seen in the emergency room without a long wait or maybe even being turned away because it's not, quote, an emergency. So
Yeah.
this is great information to have.
Absolutely. And then I do want to lift up just another piece around healthcare and making sure that we care well for one another. I signed on to a bill with Senator Jen Jordan, SB 181, that would cap the amount that you have to pay for insulin. And I don't know if you all heard Congressman Hank Johnson spoke about this. This is happening on the federal level. So in 2023, because of the federal regulations, there will be a cap on insulin so that you're not having to pay more than $35 a month for that life saving, absolutely essential drug.
Right?
And so we introduced legislation before knowing anything about the federal government's interventions to cap the price of both insulin and EpiPens. I happen to live on a farm where we have bees, honeybees, which I love and adore, and I'm not allergic to them, but we have to keep EpiPens on hand, that very important life-saving drug, right?
Yes,
And an EpiPen today, it could cost me $250. I never know how much it's going to cost. Sometimes, when I first bought them, they were 25. Now they could be $250. And so we've been introducing some legislation to try to cap the prices of those drugs that they're not like if you have anaphylactic shock, like you didn't ask for that, right? Like you didn't
right.
you need that drug and it shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg to get it.
Correct, correct. Well, again, thank you for all that you're doing to move this all forward and to help us in the health and wellness space rather. So this is really important. So I hear we have a huge need for insulin, and it should not be cost prohibitive to buy. When
And
you
it's not expensive to make. I think that's the key. Like, this is not that I mean, insulin is something that's been around for a very, very long time. It doesn't cost manufacturers a huge amount of money to make it, and so the fact that they are essentially exploiting people because they know that it's needed, it's just not right. I do a lot of work in the AIDS and HIV space, and we have a similar experience there around access to drug treatment for HIV. That medication no longer costs a lot to make. It doesn't. It's cheap to make. You can make it for a penny a pill. But because we don't have any real regulations around it, we see governments often having to pay extraordinary amounts of money for these life-saving drugs for people who are living with HIV. And so I very much believe in a fair market, and I think that it's important that I understand our capitalist values and how we are as a country, how we're established, and at the same time, I think we've got to value people's lives and value people's access to life-saving medication, especially when it doesn't cost if it only costs a penny to make it, how dare you sell it to me for 50, for $50 a pill?
right,
Like,
right.
that there's got to be some balance there.
I agree. So we do have a question about that. So this brings up a really good point. There's a family member who went to the doctor and was told if they have high blood pressure, then their insurance would not cover their office visit. So more or less, I guess, how can this be okay? We don't understand what's happening.
Yeah. So I want to encourage you to reach out to, I don't know who this question comes from, but I want to encourage them to reach out to our commissioner for insurance. So that office, and if you can't get in touch with that person, then reach out to your local legislator and we will do it for you. But the commission on insurance, their job is to help answer that specific question, right? And to help you navigate with your insurance company why they are rejecting a particular claim. And so I think oftentimes we are really disconnected from our statewide offices, like our commissioners, and we don't necessarily know what their purpose is.
Right.
And so some of that is around. That's why I'm naming this because I want people to be educated around this, right? I had a constituent who reached out to me with a similar type of case where their child had some special needs, and the need that they needed were not being covered by insurance, and so I reached out to the insurance commissioner. his organization is, got back to us and explained, well, this is how the doctor needs to write the request in this specific way.
Right.
And then the child got the care they needed, right? So please reach out to your insurance commissioner. We pay them, we elect them, we pay them,
Right.
they work for you. So make them work.
No, no, that's great. And I do feel that's why it's important to get to know who your elected officials are so that and build relationships with them, not just when you need them for something, but build relationships so that they're more responsive maybe because everyone has a lot to do. Everyone has a lot on their plate. So it is important to get to know who your elected officials are and how they can help you if you need help moving the ball forward on an issue that's important to you and or your community.
That's right. Yeah.
So this is all great information. Please continue to ask your questions in the Q&A function or the chat box. So next question, Senator Jackson, if you received $1 million grant to use for the county in any way you wanted, what would you do with it and why?
So I love this question because it's like allowed me to dream, but also to realize how limiting $1 million is in the long scheme of things. But for me, I think the priority would be providing affordable housing. So I live here in Stone Mountain, but I work with people who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm very close to the refugee resettlement community that's here in Clarkston. And I don't know if people are aware, but we resettle hundreds and thousands of people from war-torn areas to settle and to restart their life here in DeKalb County, and it's amazing. But our ability to do that is being inhibited because of the lack of affordable housing. Right now, today, we have hundreds of refugees living in extended stay hotels. They came, imagine this, they came to America believing that they were going to be able to build a better life and have all these great opportunities. And they are stuck in an extended stay hotel along the highway here in DeKalb County because we don't have access to affordable housing. So for me, that's the first $1 million, and $1 million isn't going to solve that problem, but that first $1 million needs to go to affordable housing to help get refugees out of hotels, to get families, to get native born folks out of hotels. I can't tell you how heartbreaking it is to go and visit a family who, we got moved out of their car because they had been living in their car. We got them moved out of their car into an extended stay, and then to walk into that hotel room and to see 5 children and 2 adults living in one room with 2 full beds.
Mhm.
I mean, it's astounding. It's heartbreaking. How can this be happening in our great state, in our great county? We can do better. So I think that $1 million needs to start there.
I love that. I love that. And in the work that I do work with Clarkston, the new
Yeah.
Beverly Burks. I work now with Commissioner Ted Terry, who has built a tiny house,
Yes.
first tiny home community in Clarkston. It's a beautiful community. It has a lot of resources there, but it is very heartbreaking to hear people that actually live in extended stay hotels. And I hear that from the people in the school system that I work with continuously,
Yeah.
that you have families that live in extended stay hotels, and that is very
Mm.
heartbreaking. That's not a condition where you can necessarily thrive. So
No.
I commend you on using that $1 million to, work on affordable housing. And I do hear that that's a topic that we all hear. A lot of people are working on that because it's really needed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, kids can't learn well if they're coming back to a house that's not even a house, right? It's a room that's overcrowded. There's no space for them to learn, to do their homework. I mean, I can't imagine having to learn virtually in a hotel room where there are 3 other kids or 4 other kids and you're all trying to learn virtually at the same time. It doesn't work, right? And those areas, quite frankly, aren't very safe to be around anyway. And so there's just so many different layers that go on to reasons why we need to make some changes.
Wonderful. Yes,
Yeah.
true, true. Yeah, it's just astonishing to hear that people are living this way. Okay, so we'll move on to our next question. Again, we commend you for all of your great work. As we're listening and talking, I just appreciate, as well as our audience, what you're doing in your position as a senator. So thank
Thank you. Thank you.
you. Sure. So, what is being done to address the biggest hurdles of interoperability among healthcare, human services, and community systems?
Yeah, so this is where I wish that Representative Billy Mitchell were here because I'm hoping that he might have had a better answer to this question than I do. I'm not really sure. So there are So there are reasons why people can't communicate with each other. Every hospital has its own system. Those systems don't talk to each other. They're proprietary, and so it costs a lot of money to get those systems to talk to each other. And then there are privacy concerns too, because every time I go to the doctor's office, I sign something that says that you can't share my information with anyone except for the people I tell you to, right?
Correct.
And so there are a number of layers to that create these obstacles, and I'm not quite sure, to be honest, about what's happening, particularly on a. I haven't seen any legislation that's come through my desk or over my view that really addresses this issue, and so I'm not really clear about it from the hospital side. Now, I will say we have the same problem in public safety as well, and so I am aware of the ways that we're trying to work through that with public safety, but right now the problem with public safety is every county has their own kind of database about, like, here are the people who've gotten who've gotten tickets. Here are the people who have gotten a court order saying that they have to stay away from the person that they've been beating on, and that court order is really powerful and important, but it's housed in DeKalb. It is not housed in Quitman County, where the person is fleed to, right? And so we've got that same problem happening. We've talked a lot about, not in this conversation, but generally, I've heard a lot of conversations about crime and this concern about repeat offenders. Like, how is it that we have repeat offenders who are getting out and doing more crimes? Well, part of it is because when a judge goes to sentence somebody, they can't see that you had a conviction for such and such, or maybe it was dismissed, or maybe it's still pending. That's most often the case, that you have a court case that's pending in these 5 other metro counties.
Right.
They can't see that.
Right.
And so what we're calling a repeat offender for that judge is just somebody who, is in front of them with this particular charge. And so um, this kind of work of connecting counties to counties, whether that in hospitals to hospitals, doctors to doctors, that work, I mean, it's showing up as being lacking in a number of different spaces, not just in the healthcare system.
Well, yes, thank you for sharing that information. And it helps to correlate what's happening in public safety as well, because as you know, Georgia has grown, Metro Atlanta has grown significantly, and our systems and our people don't necessarily talk to each other.
That's right.
That's why it's important to build these bridges and relationships. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say one bill, since we're talking about public safety, I mean, that's an issue I really care a lot about. One piece of legislation that I've been working with some advocates around is pertains to taking guns from people who are convicted of domestic violence. So right now, a judge can order, as a part of that process, that if you have guns, that you need to surrender them, or that you can't have your gun license anymore. Because what we know is that um, if there's a gun in a home involving a couple that's having domestic violence, the likelihood of that ending in death is substantially greater than it is if there's not a gun in the home. And we know that women are more at risk of being killed or murdered by their spouse or partner when there have been documented instances of domestic violence beforehand, right? It usually starts with hitting, and then it ends, if we don't intervene, with death. So judges are able to make these orders, but because we don't have a statewide system that says, here's who has a license to carry a gun, or here's whose license has been revoked, because that's what a judge will do. They'll revoke. So you're in DeKalb County, they revoke your license to carry a gun because you've been convicted of domestic violence. Well, you just walk down the street to Fulton County and get you a new license. Like, it's that simple, because we don't have a registry that allows us to know that information. And that puts largely women, but it puts us all at harm. It puts us all at risk. And so that's a loophole that we're working on, that I think we may actually hopefully be able to close up here in the near future, that won't take guns out of the hands of people who are law-abiding citizens,
mhm.
but will ultimately make us safer.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, thank you for that as well.
Yeah.
Are there any other, is there any other legislation that you're working on that you want to share?
Sure. I mean, I love that question. Uh, I see in the chat somebody said, I thought a background check would prevent this. And that's what any prudent citizen would think would happen, is that a background check would flag and say, hey, this person has had their license revoked because of X, Y, or Z. A background check in DeKalb County will do that exact thing. So if they try to come back to DeKalb County, the same place where their license was revoked,
Mhm.
it's going to get flagged. But if they go to any other county, because these things don't talk to each other, it's not going to get picked up. We don't have that kind of extensive background checks happening. So that's the problem there. Legislation that I'm working on. Yeah. So legislation that I'm working on, I have two bills that I want to talk about. One, I'm working on a sexual assault protective order bill. So here in Georgia, if you are a victim of domestic violence, you can go to a civil court and say, hey, this person's beating on me. I need a protective order, what we kind of colloquially call a restraining order. Can you give me a restraining order? Make them stay away from me.
Mhm.
No problem. Sign, check, go, be at peace. If you have been a victim of violence in a dating relationship, then we have a similar thing. You say, like, hey, I know I'm not married to this person, but we've been dating. There's been violence. Can you give me a restraining order, protective order? No problem. Got you. Taken care of. And finally, if you are a victim of stalking, if somebody at work or in your neighborhood or wherever has been stalking you, you can go and get a stay away order and say, like, make these people stop stalking me. But if you're a victim of sexual assault and that person, you're not married to them and you're not dating them, you have no civil recourse to be able to get a protective order that says, make this person stay the hell away from me. Um, you can go through the criminal process, but I mean, Kendra, you and I both know there are thousands and thousands of people who choose not to press charges
Yes,
when it comes to sexual assault for a myriad of very good reasons, right?
correct, correct.
Um, and so to not be able to go to a civil judge and say, like, listen, this sexual assault happened to me. Can you please? I just need a piece of paper that says this person has to stay away from me, that they can't, that they can't engage with me anymore. Right now, there's not an avenue to get that. And so the bill that I'm introducing this session, it will be a bipartisan bill. It will have sponsorship on both sides of the aisle. Will be to create an avenue so that any person who has been a victim of sexual assault can go to a civil court, which is just a lot easier. You don't have to have an attorney, right? Like there are all these reasons why it's so much more accessible, and you can get a protective order, a stay away order, in order to have some freedom and to be able to go forward and get the healing that you might need. So that's one piece of legislation that I'm super excited about. I think it's really needed. I've heard a lot from the sexual assault community about that desire. And so I'm happy to be able to introduce that. Um, and then the second piece is for public safety officers. So before I became a pastor and a priest, I worked as an EMT
Oh,
and worked alongside firefighters and police officers, and they are near and dear to my heart. And fundamentally, I believe that firefighters and EMTs, we are the true heroes in this great state, right? But a sad truth is that oftentimes, that sometimes a consequence of the work that public safety officers engage in is that our mental health deteriorates and that people commit suicide. Um, the leading cause of death of police officers before COVID was suicide. And so in Georgia, we have a fund that provides death benefits in the event that a public safety officer dies in the line of duty. Right. So just recently, we had an officer from DeKalb County who was killed in the line of duty. Her family receives a death benefit as a result of that. Right. But if you commit suicide, your family doesn't receive that death benefit. And so it's this again will be a bipartisan piece of legislation that we're introducing that would extend those rights and access to those benefits to officers who die by way of suicide within 6 months of having served. So they may in fact be on disability or leave because they're trying to wrestle through this stuff, but we want to make sure that those families get taken care of. I think the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for me that like made this legislation so urgent to me was that Hank Johnson talked about the uprising or the riot, the thing that happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Well, after the January 6th insurrection, there were 4 officers who committed suicide as a consequence of that trauma. None of their families received death benefits
wow.
as a result.
Did
None of them. despite their heroic efforts, right? Despite we know that that trauma, that death was as a result of their work, but that family still didn't receive the death benefit. So that for me was like the most like was the end of. I mean, I'd known this issue and certainly knew other families here in Georgia for whom that had happened. But when we talked about these four officers who really did try to defend our democracy and our country,
Right.
and for their families to not receive a death benefit, it just didn't seem right. So that's the second piece of legislation that I'm really excited about that I myself am personally authoring.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. We appreciate that. So, is there any legislation out there or on the table, speaking of our heroes committing suicide, anything to help them with their mental health?
Yeah. Yeah, so my friend and colleague Greg Kennard, who is on the House side, he represents Gwinnett County. He's offering legislation that will allow for access to disability for mental health concerns. So right now, you can get disability, you can get paid disability and paid leave if you get shot in the arm, right? Like,
Right.
okay, you gotta recover from that, you gotta recoup, and you can get workers comp, which is really, really key. I don't know if anybody has had like workers' comp is one of the best insurance protections that we have for people who are working, right? So you can get workers' comp for a physical injury. But right now, as the law is, you cannot get workers' comp for a psychological, a mental illness, a mental injury. So he's authored and introduced legislation that I think will actually get a hearing. This is the year of mental health here in Georgia. Like I'm chairing the mental health caucus with my Republican colleague Brian Strickland on the Senate side because we really do recognize and we're going to be pushing legislation around mental health to try to help make us all healthier. And so Greg Kennard's bill will do this is specifically for public safety officers again that will say, listen, if there has been what we call it when we talk about in war terms, we talk about it as a moral injury, right? When there's been a heart injury, a that when there's been a mental when there's been a psychological injury that we are going to treat that as being just as important as if you got ran over by a car and needed to recuperate from that. So I'm hopeful that will make some movement and thus cut down on the need for my bill, because obviously we don't want people to commit suicide. So if we can intervene, get people the workers' comp that they need, get them the disability that they need in order to take care of those psychological injuries that they've experienced, then hopefully they don't commit suicide. Um, but God forbid that doesn't work. We still need to make sure those families get taken care of.
Yes, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that because of COVID, more people are paying attention to mental health and
Yeah.
seeing it as an injury or something that needs to be looked at further so that we have legislation, laws, et cetera, to
Yeah.
help people with their mental illness, the state of mental illness?
Yeah, I think that COVID has really helped us talk about mental illness and mental health and well-being more openly. I think that um, I think that more people have experienced it, and it's a lot less further away. So I think for so many people before COVID, it was like, oh, those people have mental illness, and by those people, they were mainly just talking about people who sleep outside or people who they like, who have to go and be hospitalized. Like it's been very stigmatized as a very specific population of people.
Right,
But during COVID, I think because so many people experienced depression and isolation and anxiety, because it showed up in our own homes, um, you know, we're more willing to talk about it, and there's more proactive legislation. So when I look around the mental health caucus, the legislators who are involved in this, um, I I guarantee you every single legislator who's working on this issue, either themselves or someone that they love closely, has been battling with some form of mental health condition.
right.
And so it's there's more of it. So people are aware of it. And I think it's been destigmatized because it's not just, these people who make bad decisions and end up homeless,
Right.
but it's your neighbor, it's your wife, it's your husband, it's you, right? And so we're recognizing that there needs to be some attention to it. And our biggest need, I think, in Georgia, honestly, is we need the labor force. We need workers. We need mental health care providers who will take insurance. Um, that's one of the things. Um, we need them to take insurance, but we also just need more. We don't have enough mental health care workers. And so a lot of these new initiatives that we're going to see coming through the mental health caucus will be around encouraging workforce, building up a workforce, giving some incentives to get people to come to Georgia and to stay in Georgia, to do the mental health care that we need. I also believe we'll see, I'm quite sure that access to telehealth for mental health services, that will be protected. I think I don't know that we might be losing those days where we can do our, like, general physician visit on Zoom, which let me tell you, I loved it. It was great. I'll go weigh myself. I'll tell you how much I weigh, how tall I am, and now let's just talk and you write me whatever. That might be going away on the physical side, but I am quite certain that access to telehealth, when it relates to mental health, that's going to be here to stay, that we're going to preserve that, simply to try to increase the access
Yeah.
for more folks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful. These are great initiatives.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great things that you're doing. I did not know that there was a mental health caucus.
Yeah, well, we're brand new, so
Okay.
that's part of it. That
Tell
there's one on the House side and there's one on the Senate side, and we're really the Speaker of the House is very, very committed and dedicated to this, and so is the governor, and so I think we will see really important movements. I mean, the problem is Georgia is ranked number 48th in the nation for access to mental health care and mental health care treatment in general, and that's just not okay.
that's
And so that's really terrible. Um, where I come from in South Carolina, we used to say, "Thank God for Mississippi," and that's just not okay. Because right now, people are saying, "Thank God for Georgia, we're not last," right? And so we're going to make some changes.
well, good, good,
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful. So we do have another question. So what is your position on the expansion of Medicare and Medicaid for the state of Georgia? Is there,
Yeah.
but go ahead, go ahead.
So I've been really clear that we must expand Medicaid. And we need to do it now. It doesn't cost us anything to do it. Like, there are so many federal initiatives available to us. To not do it at this point, to me, just seems cruel. And it's just related to some strange political ideology that has no bearing on the wellness and well-being of Georgia citizens. We need to expand Medicaid. And when we talk about expanding Medicaid, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the nuances of it. Now, I personally believe that we should provide Medicare for all. I think that every person who lives here is entitled to healthcare, should be entitled to healthcare, that we have a responsibility to our neighbors, to our brothers and sisters, our siblings,
Mhm.
to provide access to healthcare. I believe that. But when it comes to Medicaid expansion specifically, all we're asking is that the working poor, people who are actually working, but just don't make enough money to be able to buy their own insurance, that they get to have Medicaid expansion. We're talking about 500,000 Georgians, all who are working. So, for those who are like, I don't think we should have handouts, and it's not, yeah, I'm not talking about giving a handout to somebody who's staying at home and taking care of their children, which is work, by the way. Um, I'm not talking about those folks. I'm talking about the people who are actually going to their work every day. They're going to jobs, but they just simply don't make enough money in order to afford health care. We need to expand Medicaid and give those folks the healthcare that they need, which ultimately will save our rural hospitals. I think that I think that our political ideologies have cost us literal lives. There are rural hospitals. My in-laws live in Jessup, Georgia, down South Georgia. In order for them, they can get a little health care in Jessup, Georgia, but in order for them to get like some true comprehensive good health care, they've got to drive like an hour and a half in order to get access to true, good, comprehensive, skilled, specialized healthcare.
Wow.
But if we expanded Medicaid, our rural hospitals could have survived, and more rural hospitals, the ones that we have left, would survive if we simply expanded Medicaid. Because the reality is, it's a lot of folks who live in rural Georgia who are in that kind of working poor level. They're the ones who are working, but they just can't quite afford their own medical insurance. And so rural hospitals are suffering greatly. And we're allowing that to happen simply because of some political ideology that has nothing to do with the well-being of people. And that I just really struggle with that. So I'm all in for Medicaid expansion. I'm also all in for Medicare for all. That, of course, is a federal initiative. I don't know when we're going to see that day, but I'm praying for that day because, again, I do believe I am a Christian pastor, and I'm unashamed and unabashed about believing in a Jesus who gave healthcare to anyone who came up and asked for it. And so I think we can do that. We are the wealthiest country in the world. The least we can do is provide access to healthcare for our citizens.
Sure, definitely. That
Yeah,
should be a given, right?
yeah, yeah.
So that's why it's important to have people like you to represent us to talk about these important issues. The working poor, people probably just don't see that every day in their
Yeah.
daily lives. But when you see it, people who are dealing with things that are important issues. Like people need access to healthcare. They need to be able to visit their doctors where they live, not having to drive an hour and a half to get good care.
There are entire counties in Georgia that don't have a single gynecologist, like not a one. So can you imagine being a pregnant woman? And I don't know,
No,
before the counties want to give it, but being a pregnant woman anywhere where you don't have access to a gynecologist or an obstetrician in your own county, that's what we're living in right now.
that's interesting. And then what if you don't have transportation? Then what happens?
And then we don't allow doulas to be licensed in Georgia, so, you can't even get a licensed doula to care for you in your actual community. So, I mean, it's just again, I mean, to me, it's all about how do we care well, how do we care best for the people who live around us, and for me, this means we provide access to healthcare. It's absolutely essential. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yes, definitely, definitely. I just want to remind our audience to please make sure you enter your questions in our chat feature or the Q&A box. I do have another question. What neighborhood do you live in? Why? And do you have favorite spaces or places to spend your time?
Yeah, so I live in unincorporated Stone Mountain. It's the Redan community is kind of what we call ourselves, and I live here because we wanted land. My wife and I come from the country, and we love the amenities of the city, but we wanted to have some of the taste of country life. So we live on 5 acres. When I sit on my back porch, I can't see my neighbors. I can't see anything but forest and trees and our animals. And so it's as if I've been transported back to Cowpen, South Carolina, but I can get to the grocery store in less than 2 minutes. It's great. um, but also we've come to love. I mean, so we were attracted because they're 5 acres, and everybody on our street has about that on. And so we were attracted to the kind of spaciousness. But over time, we've stayed because we love our neighbors and the diversity that is here. On my street alone, there are 6 different religions represented. There are 6 different languages that are spoken. People come from all over the world here, and we really love that about it. And we love the sense of kind of community that we have, and the ways. I mean, my neighbor doesn't speak any English at all, and yet we've found ways to connect and bond, and I love that we're able to be able to translate over through shared goat milk and eggs. We're able to build community, and so we've loved that. We love living close to Clarkston, and to our Clarkston neighbors, and working with Mayor Burke, who's amazing. That's been a gift. My favorite place to go, which as soon as we're going to get off this call, is in downtown Stone Mountain. It's Gilly's Brew Bar. They specialize in fancy non-alcoholic drinks, and really great coffee. So I'm gonna go down and get a chider, which is their chai tea cider. It's amazing. Gillies, Gillys. It's also Black owned. And so I love that about it. And then just we walk on the square in Stone Mountain, and the square has really, for anybody who hasn't been down to the square in the last 5, 6 years, it is completely transformed. There's so many great businesses there. A number of them are Black owned. There's great food to eat. It's just really joyful to just walk down the street. So that's kind of my favorite area to hang out. Not the park, but the village. I want to make that distinction. Those are two different places.
Understood. Well, I was born in Atlanta. When my parents divorced, we moved to DeKalb. So I'm very familiar with Stone Mountain, the little village, which I love, the little city. I just
Yeah.
remember, have so many good memories about it when my son was growing up. And yes, you can just park and walk to the mountain if you want to
Yeah.
exercise. So it's a great, quaint little town. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I know we still have a little bit of time, but do you have any closing thoughts, anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, I just want to thank you for sending these questions and such thoughtful questions. When I received them, I was like, oh, wow, like, these people care. Um, and they want to hear about things that really matter. And so I appreciate you. I don't know, Kendra, if you wrote the questions, but wherever they came from, I really do appreciate the thoughtfulness and the attention that went into it and raising such important issues. Like, I don't know when the last time I've been asked about right to work. That's not something that people ask about very often, and yet it's so important and so crucial. And so thank you for your thoughtfulness. And I just want to highlight something that you said earlier, Kendra, around contacting your local legislators. It is important. Get to know us. We are regular human beings who will come, and I've done porch visits with constituents where I sat out on the back of their porch and drank a cup of coffee and got to know some of their issues. And so call on us. If you're trying to navigate any type of state agency, we're here to help you. Our team, we have a staff that has a special phone number to get to the Department of Insurance or the Department of Health and Human Services, or wherever it is that you are. And so please reach out to us. And the final thing that I'll add is that every piece of legislation that I've sponsored, for the most part, has come from somebody in my community asking for it. So the bill that I passed and is now a law that allows victims of stalking to get out of their leases and to move to a place of safety. I didn't imagine that for myself. I had a constituent who came to me and said, listen, like, this is a problem. I can't move and I'm being stalked. And I have this protective order that tells him to stay away from me, but he's a stalker. And he knows where I live. And so please, if you want to see better laws in Georgia and you have ideas about it, bring those to your legislators. I think that's how we get better as Georgians, is when we share what we know. Because as you said, Kendra, like, not everybody really understands what it is to be a person who's like working poor and can't afford insurance, right? Like, not everybody, we can't see everything. And so when you share your ideas and your issues, it helps us make Georgia better. So I'm very grateful to the people of District 41 who elected me. I hope that they will elect me again to continue to represent us, the people. And again, Kendra, thank you all so much for hosting this.
Well, thank you. And I will say the questions, they came from all of us. So it's a collective
Oh,
effort.
great.
So it's group effort. But I will say, just really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I love that you're very engaged in your community as well as at the state house. It makes a difference. And when I tell people to please reach out to your elected officials, I really do mean that, because people get to meet, their representatives, people like you who are actually able to help us to move the needle, which I think most people don't realize, that you can really reach out to your elected officials. I see that Siobhan dropped your website into the chat, but people don't really think about that. People want to know, who's my elected official?
Yeah.
Or who are my elected officials? I dropped them a link to show them who their elected officials are, and people are really willing to work with you, listen to you, hear you out, and help you with your issues, or just get to know you. Because that's how we build community. I'll just say that.
Exactly.
That's how we build community, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we have really enjoyed having you here. I know we have a few more minutes before we are ready to close out. So I just want to give anyone an opportunity. to drop any questions that they have. I do have one. So, what is the temperament in the Georgia legislator? The media presents a view of them versus us. And with that, how do you keep a level head?
Yeah. So I've only been serving in the Senate, and I've been there for a year. So that's really the only body of the legislature that I can speak about with great knowledge. And I will say that the temperament in the Senate, in the body of the Senate, which there are only 56 of us, so we actually know each other. It's kind of like a big classroom. Um, it's actually quite collegial. Like I have friends with people who have really different ideological views than I do, and we care for one another in a way that you're just never going to see on the media, right? The senator who sits behind me, who lives in rural Georgia, a place that I've never been before in my life, but his mother died, and when the notice went out that his mother died, I called him, because that's what you do when somebody's mother dies, even if they have a different letter behind their name than you do. And, we had an hour-long conversation where I learned all about his family and his mom and who he is. And the reality is that any number of the 55 of us would do that for each other. That's kind of the nature of who we are, I think, as human beings. Um, and then there are issues that we just fight about, right? Like we fought about redistricting, and we did, and we put everything on that we had, our whole hearts and selves on the line to fight for it. And I mean, to me, it's kind of like I played sports my entire life, and so whenever we would play somebody in basketball, you fight hard, you might even foul people along the way, but afterwards you shake hands and you carry on. And I think that's kind of how we act. So what you all see is the fight on the basketball court, and you see the fouls and you see the technical violations that are happening. um, and all of those things are matter, and they're important, and we are proud to fight for what we believe is right here in Georgia. And at the end of the day, we also are willing to share a nice beverage together afterwards. So um, I think the second piece of that is, how do I keep a level head? I get to go home, and I come home to 5 acres and goats and chickens that who don't know what I do in the world, and they don't actually care as long as I feed them and pet them. And so that's, I think, really grounding. But also, I think so much of my level headedness inside of the Senate is just being super, super clear about why I'm here, and being very, very grounded in my own principles. And so, the rest of it just kind of floats around me because I'm clear. Like, I know where I stand. I know I'm here for the people. I'm here for the people who don't get thought about. Like, that's where my emphasis is. And I just kind of keep my head down and focus on that, and everything else, like, I don't know, a lot of it's theater. So I just let it happen around me.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, you have been absolutely wonderful to speak with. So I appreciate you. We all appreciate you, Senator Jackson. I don't see where we have any additional questions. So as we close out, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and what you do in the community and county in which you love. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I will personally reach out to you so that we can connect from an Emory standpoint. But
Awesome.
audience, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening in to Senator Jackson. And again, we appreciate you. So as we close, you can go to the expo, leave the session, go over to the expo, and just kind of hang out. Then we'll go back to the final stage at about 12 so that we can hear closing remarks from our president.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.